What a great honor it is for me to be here with all of you today on one of the most special days of your lives. We're here in celebration of each of you, of all of your ancestors that came before you, who breathed their best breath forward in the spirit of wisdom, of compassion, and into love and persistence. And many of those people are here in this audience. I can see their love for all the graduates. It comes in the forms of the pictures you take. It comes in the forms of the flowers you carry. And it comes in the forms of the teddy bears that you gift. Teddy bears are a very special thing in First Nations cultures. Bears mean family. And some people don't know that bears actually see in color. And this little bear has seen a lot. He represents the 165,000 children who continue to receive less public services in this country from the federal government, but too often are judged by a Canadian public who doesn't know any better as if they get more. This bear represents all of the non-Indigenous children who may not be experts in law or in politics, but they are experts in love and fairness. And when they saw their First Nations children and their friends being treated unfairly, they showed up in droves and they said, this country, this year, is going to be a place where I can grow up and not see my friends discriminated against. School buses in front of courtrooms. You know, I think every courtroom should have a teddy bear, and every courtroom should have some glitter. Because the law is important. It is the architecture of our society. But laws without love can be unjust and they can be harmful. Laws without compassion can be unthoughtful and can be regressive. When laws have compassion, we see great progress in this nation, like universal medical care. When laws are developed without love, we see things like the Indian Act. We see a piece of legislation that removed First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children from their families, from places where they were loved, places where their parents had dreams just as you have your dreams to your graduates, and in places that too often had no teddy bears. We've seen laws create the Indian Act that not only regulates who is a First Nations person in this country, but regulates all aspects of our lives. Laws without love will never be justice. You know, unjust laws are always used to quash dissent from those who believe that what is legal is not always just. One of my greatest heroes was a doctor. His name is Peter Henderson Bryce. And in 1907, he did a survey of the children in the residential schools and found they were dying at a rate of 25% a year, all from preventable disease. Dr. Bryce said, you know, the First Nations people all across this country are only getting about a third of what the people in Ottawa alone are getting for tuberculosis treatment. He said, level that out and we could save the children's lives. Canada retaliated against him and eventually fired him out of the public service. But Dr. Bryce continued to speak out as a man of moral courage. And that's the other thing too, I would say, graduates. One of the most important tools in your legal toolkit is what your families have gifted you. And that is your values and the moral courage to defend those values. Because you don't know who your client is. You know, it could be a teddy bear, or it could be someone who's asking you to do something that's unjust. Other than law students and lawyers, few people, and certainly no bears, ever dream of growing up and spending their days in courts. Let's face it, those of us, you and I, We equate courts with going to jail or getting a divorce. Neither are on our wish list. We do everything we can to stay out of them. But somehow, life's path took Spirit Bearer and I into a highly contested legal case against the government of Canada. What was at question is whether in 2007, First Nations children should get the same opportunities to grow up with their families and get access to the same level of public service every other kid takes for granted. I say to this day, the most shocking thing about this case is that we had to take the government to court at all. I remember the day we filed it. It was a sunny day in Parliament. It was a question that put a red-hot poker stick into the conscience of the nation. Truly, how can we feel that Canada is a fair country if the government is racially discriminating against kids? And yet I walked out of that Parliament building that day and there was nobody there. It was easy to believe that Canadians didn't care, or maybe that they thought our kids deserved it. But I've always believed, and so has Spirit Bearer, that Canadians, as Gord Downey has said, have been trained your entire lives to look away. And if you only knew what was happening to these kids, you would stand up and you would do the right thing. So we created something called the I Am a Witness campaign to envelope the legal case in. And at first, only a few people signed up online to follow the case. That's what being a witness is. And I would enter into a lot of the tribunal rooms where the government of Canada was trying to get the case dismissed on legal loopholes. And I would hope that somebody would show up, and often it was just the bear and I, until one day in 2010. And it brings me back to the children and their sense of justice. I was about to be cross-examined by the government of Canada as they tried to get the case dismissed, when in walks a group of teenagers. The young man comes up to me, graduates, and he says, "We're from alternative school, which means we get into trouble a lot." I said, "Good, because so do I." You know, we need to train our kids to get into trouble for standing up for the right thing. And he said, "Sometimes we deserve to get into trouble, but sometimes it's a system that deserves to get into trouble, and almost no one ever does it. And you are, and you want our help, and that's why we're here." Not only did they stay those 2 days of the hearings, they came back at the next set of hearings with their friends and with their younger brothers and sisters all wearing I Am a Witness t-shirts. It was quite easy to identify who the government lawyers were, because all the rest of us were wearing those t-shirts. It didn't stop there. When children would come into the courtrooms, they would bring so many of their friends that by 2012, we had to move the hearings to the Supreme Court of Canada's building, and we had to book the children in shifts. I remember the security guard seeing all the school buses pull up at the courtroom, and kids would pile out with their bears too. He said, "It feels like it's in daycare today." And at the end of the day, when one of the children had done a drawing of him saying how special he made them feel welcome that day, he had a tear in his eye, and he said, "I've never seen justice like this." And what are little children going to learn about a hearing where government is arguing on legal technicalities? What are they possibly going to learn? When one little boy came to the hearings on a day that Canada was arguing that it wasn't fair to the government of Canada to compare the services First Nations gets to what other kids get. He wasn't convinced. In fact, he had a little scorecard. You know, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, big long list on one side and a short list on the other. And when I asked him what that meant, he said, "The long list is when the judge asks the Canada people a question. And the short list is when the Canada people actually answered the question." You know, within 30 days of filing this case, the Caring Society lost all of its federal government core funding. And we are, to this point, the only national Aboriginal organization that gets not a penny from government. And I remember when we filed it, people said, "You are going to lose because you filed a case against the biggest law firm in the country, the Department of Justice." And I said, "Well, maybe we will, because we only had $50,000 in the bank, and I knew nothing about the law." But I said, even if we lose, even if the Caring Society goes down, I want this generation of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children to know this much about us, that we love them enough to stand up for them. There's a poem that I've come to in many parts of my life, and it's a poem called Faith. And it says, when you step across that place where light leads into darkness, there'll be something solid to stand on, or you'll be taught to fly. That something solid to stand on for the Caring Society came in a letter with pencil crayon on the outside. And I think we can all agree in this audience, you may get many great papers in your life, but the best ones have crayon or pencil crayon. And inside it said, "Dear Cindy, here's some MUNY for the kids, love, Ella." And there was $1.67 inside that envelope from her piggy bank. You know, other people may have big donors, but our kids have huge hearts. And it has been the love of those children that has inspired our great legal team to work with nothing more than cookies and brownies and the odd hug from the bear. You know, Spirit Bear and I will tell you that we were so happy when the lawyers finally stepped forward, because we really didn't have a clue about what we were doing. And the children, too, were impressed with all the lawyers and would actually be hanging around the robing rooms to collect autographs from even the most reluctant of lawyers. The hearing decision came down on January 26, 2016. The first lines of the decision is that this decision is about children underlined. 135,000 children. Their lives were in that order. It's 165,000. And what was at stake when Canada was arguing all these things? Do you know that there are 3 times as many kids in foster care today than there was at the height of residential schools, driven there by the inequitable resources and the trauma of residential schools? We can talk about overrepresentation. I don't like that word because it's too easy to say. I like to think about it the way that kids themselves think about it, which is, how many sleeps till I see my mom? And if you add that up between 1989 and 2012, it's over 66 million nights that First Nations kids have spent away from their moms, or 187,000 years of childhood. That day, January 26, was to be a day of justice. The children held a party. They decided the best place to hold it was inside of Parliament. And they wanted Spirit Bear to be there too. And as one of the children who had been following the case since they were just a little kid said, discrimination is when the government doesn't think you're worth the money. And reconciliation is when all of us stand up and realize that an injustice against any child is an injustice against us all. The children continue to write letters to the Government of Canada because Canada has had 3 non-compliance orders issued to it ever since the ruling in January. We continue to struggle for justice. But the First Nations children and the non-Indigenous children would tell you this, that they know that you love them, that they know that you will walk into courtrooms with love and glitter and teddy bears. And even if you're having trouble, the Government of Canada, to treat this generation of children fairly, those children are going to be standing with you and standing with all of you as you create a just society. Because they join me in a great wish for Canada's birthday, and it has nothing to do with a rubber duck on Lake Ontario. My dream for Canada's 150th birthday, and I think the Bears too, is that we together raise a generation of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children who never have to recover from their childhoods, and a generation of non-Indigenous children who never have to say they're sorry. Graduates, I hate to tell you this, but the most important cases in your life pay only brownies and cookies. The ones that will change the world for the better. And I know each of you in your own way is going to be a part of creating a better country for all the children this teddy bear represents. And I thank you. I know that you've worked hard and sacrificed. And I know this country is going to be a better and more just world for all children because of you. So bring a teddy bear wherever you go, because the law is only the law, and it can only become justice with love, compassion, and glitter. I am so honored by the university. Thank you, Chancellor and President.